Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Untangling Climate Finance, which is brought to you by Gordian Strategies. I'm the host, Jay Tipton. I'm pleased to bring another listener review that was written on Apple Podcasts. This one comes from me123, and it says, "Great podcast to learn more about the carbon markets and environmental finance in general. 10 out of 10 would recommend." Thank you for that, me123. Very much appreciated. So in this episode, we return to agriculture with a guest who brings a wealth of experience around soil carbon and soil health in general. I'm excited to welcome Henry Rowlands, who's the co-founder, CEO, and director of Soil Information, or SIF. SIF is a U.S. public benefit corporation which is on a mission to restore soil health worldwide. SIF is actually a past client of ours, so we've been pretty fortunate to witness their impressive trajectory firsthand. And because of that, we wanted to extend an invitation to SIF to come onto the show to talk about the work they're doing around agriculture and soil. There can be no mistake made on this one. Agriculture is one of the most important economic and social sectors on the entire planet. It is essential from many perspectives, including human livelihoods, economic output, food and water security, our relationship with nature, its impact on greenhouse gas emissions, and its great potential to be a greenhouse gas sink. Henry's journey through agriculture and soil management is nothing short of inspiring, so he is the perfect guest for the topic of the day. Throughout our conversation, he will share insights from his career, explaining why ag is not just about growing food, but a cornerstone of our economy and future sustainability. He will detail how his path led him to co-found SIF, which is a company that's revolutionizing soil health measurement with cutting-edge technology and a very robust soil data platform. Henry and I will explore the challenges that SIF is addressing with the remote soil sensor and their actionable soil health metrics database. And because I cannot go 10 minutes without talking about carbon markets, we will also discuss SIF's efforts to position their tech within the major carbon credit standards, which could potentially make a big, tangible impact on both ag and climate finance. So let's dig into the dirt, literally. Henry, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Oh, it's great to be on, Jay. Everything's cool here. Just enjoying the spring in Bulgaria, so everything's great.
Love it. Why don't we just jump right into the 101, the essentials. Tell me a little bit about yourself, where you work. We know that you're in Bulgaria. You just said that, and some of your background. Maybe if you want to dig into your career background.
Absolutely. So I've been working in the agricultural space for the last 20 years. I grew up on a Welsh sheep farm, and so have pretty much been involved in agriculture all my life. But specifically, when I left Wales, when traveling across Europe, started working as a journalist, often covering agricultural topics for different news agencies in different places. Often couldn't get what I wanted published, just purely because I was a bit disruptive in the things that I wanted to cover. Back then, things surrounding carbon and contaminants were seen as disruptive. So I left the role as a journalist and went into agricultural metrics, specifically looking at things like pesticides and carbon and water and biodiversity. And I was working for different auditors as a consultant, like PwC, and working for different governments in Europe. Worked as a consultant for the Hungarian government, the French government, and then more into the commercial space, like different pension funds and different groups that were looking to reduce their carbon footprints and also reduce their contaminants footprint. That led to kind of a couple of pieces of work, which was, one was through the Detox Project, which I founded in 2015, which looks at certifying food products all over the world for being glyphosate residue free, and also testing the human population for pesticide contamination. And secondly, I started looking in depth at measurement techniques for soil carbon and biodiversity and soil health in general. That actually started at a meeting with one of the auditors and a group who had put $200 million into a carbon credit platform that was at government level, but it had gone basically wrong because the measurement system they were using, which was only satellite at that time, was not giving them auditable results. And I was amazed that someone had put so much money into a carbon credit system that they hadn't done the due diligence on the measurement platform. It just took my interest basically, and I've spent now the last seven years doing both due diligence and looking for the best possible techniques for measuring soil health. And it's taken me all over the world, which has been great fun.
Yeah, I bet that's been a journey. And that has, of course, led you to SIF, or soil information, correct?
Yep, spot on. So first I was looking at things surrounding gamma technology, then infrared, which I did a deep dive in, both near infrared and mid-infrared, and also looking at satellite measurements and improvements in satellite measurements. Did really deep dives into all of them, as well as things like Raman spectroscopy and other forms of spectroscopy. But they were extreme rabbit holes, just so you can imagine. I spent probably a year and a couple of months just on infrared technology for measuring soil health. And I stumbled across a group at the University of Texas at Dallas 4 years ago. I actually cold called them because I saw a paper that was published on the measurement of a specific pesticide in apples. I think it was atrazine. And so I cold called the professor, Dr. Shalini Prasad, and we spent, I think it was about 2 hours on a call, which was pretty extraordinary of her to give me that time for a cold caller.
Yeah, no doubt.
So she started talking about their work, and I'd been disappointed up to that point just because everything I'd come across had either been not accurate enough compared with the gold standard. Gold standard being you just basically dig up a core of soil and send it to the lab and it gets measured. Everything else was either not accurate enough, everything needed a technician to go out right into the field, which was a big issue because technicians are expensive, and everything also gave only point-in-time measurements. A technician would go out maybe twice a year. You would try and take an average from that, which is, I've found over time, pretty impossible to audit because someone could have just mulched the day before, or the climate conditions could have been different. So you're never going to get something that all of the different stakeholders now in agriculture and outside of agriculture within carbon can actually audit. And so when I started talking to Dr. Prasad, it was the first technology that I've come across which didn't require a technician, firstly, and therefore I would imagine could be audited. Now, I didn't know much at that stage, but she had been working in the biomedical sphere for previous 15 years, and they'd received huge government granting in the US from different groups within the government for basically creating electrochemical sensors that could be used in low moisture conditions. And that was the key, because I'd actually looked at electrochemistry before for soil measurement, but everything had only been worked in very high moisture conditions, therefore really couldn't work out in the field in soil. But she'd been designing electrochemical sensors that could be used in passive sweat. So the sweat that we all sweat 24 hours a day, it would sit on the skin and measure things like markers for sepsis, cortisol, glucose in real time. So taking a measurement all the time. And that immediately opened my mind towards the idea that this could be used in the environmental space for directly measuring the ionic substances. Again, most of the current measurement systems only estimate what they're trying to measure. using things like rays, but these would directly measure the ionic substances. That was just from that first call was a huge breakthrough in my thinking towards a whole new type of technology that could be used in the environmental space. And that was kind of the root of where soil information came about. I talked to Dr. Prasad for the next 2 years about different methods of or different matrices that the technology could be used in. And then we started with my fellow founders, Soil Information, to do an R&D project at University of Texas at Dallas, which was a long time in the planning, but has seen some success. So yeah, that's how SIF came about.
Lovely. Go a little bit more into what you guys are doing today. Obviously, you've developed these sensors. You're applying them to agriculture. I'm sure you've got a couple projects going on outside of the pilot that you had in Texas, but what is the game plan for SIF and what are you guys trying to achieve?
Sure. So we dived into the R&D world 2 years ago. First, we did everything in lab. We did testing in all sorts of different soil types from around the world. One of the keys here is that we're actually measuring both pools of carbon, organic carbon and inorganic carbon. No one else that I'm aware of is measuring inorganic carbon in field, but the key is to understand the total carbon in the soil. We're also measuring bulk density, so you can get a tons per hectare output of carbon, pH, moisture, and both pools of nitrogen, so nitrate and ammonium, so that you can measure plant available nitrogen. We built all of those sensors in lab, at least Dr. Chilingni Prasad's team did at UTD. We then tested them with internally in the lab and validated them in the lab at Texas A&M University, where our blind validators for it. And we were getting over 90% accuracy, actually over 95% accuracy against the gold standard for all of the parameters in lab. So that excited us because we had no idea, of course, if this would work in the soil.
Yeah.
And then we took it into the field after that stage, and we did 5 large-scale field trials in different soils, in different locations, 3 in Texas, in horticulture, in cropping, and in turf, and in different soil types. One in the middle of the rainforest in Costa Rica, my fellow founder Tom Newmark's Eco Lodge and Eco Farm, and we also did a field trial at the Danforth Plant Science Center in St. Louis, which is a famous plant science center. And amazingly to me, even though I've been involved in this for a while, we were again getting around 90% accuracy. And in these field trials, we're taking a data reading, or should I say the sensor is taking a data reading every 8 hours. So we can see the fluxes and the flow of carbon and start to understand carbon permanence and sequestration over time as an average, and therefore make it auditable. And so it's a bit like seeing the heartbeat of the soil, right? The heartbeat of Mother Earth, which is just extraordinarily exciting when you see the sensor feeds coming through on the computer.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where we are at the moment. We've finished our full trials and are into a phase of commercialization. And we should be having commercial probes available in Q1 next year through our licensee, which is a commercial licensee. We signed the license in February this year. So they're building technology using some wonderful engineering companies. So we're at a stage at the moment from a sensor point of view.
The ball is very rolling, is what it sounds like.
Yep, absolutely.
This is kind of a 2-part question because you said that the sensor is collecting data every 8 hours. So the first part of the question is, can you paint a bit of a visual of what the sensor is and what it looks like and how long it's in the ground or where exactly it is in the field, so that the listeners have an idea of what the sensor actually would be like if they can imagine it out on their field? And then the second part is, can you go a little bit more specifically into the actual matrix that it's collecting and then sending up to the cloud or to the database?
Sure. As I mentioned, because this is electrochemistry and electrochemical sensing, you're actually measuring the ionic substances directly in the soil, right? So you're actually, in reality, measuring like a wearable does on the body. These are small electrochemical sensor chips, like 1 centimeter by 2 centimeters. And what they do is they fit in a probe at a specific depth. At the moment, we're at one depth, which is about 20 centimeters under the soil. In the commercial probes, they'll be at 2 or 3 depths. So you're measuring the flow of different nutrients through the soil. And what they do is they actually measure a certain diameter around the probe, which is much bigger than the diameter that you would get from even a soil core that you're taking, right? Because you're using electrochemistry. And what happens is the sensors take measurements every 8 hours and send that measurement to, at the moment, an SD card, which is sitting, just because of security during the trials, we're just using an SD card and collecting it at the end of a growing season. They last for a whole growing season. They should be lasting for 2 to 3 years. By the end of this year, we're in R&D on that. So they literally just sit in the soil and take measurements. Now, they're pretty easy to install, so a farmer can install them rather than a technician. And they don't need some sort of major calibration because, as I said, they're measuring directly the ionic substances. Your very, very basic calibration and basically for the soil to settle is done on the device, and it takes about 24 to 48 hours for you to start getting reliable readings from the actual device. It's basically a plastic tube at the moment in the Gen 1 prototype that has been 3D printed by the university and sits in the soil taking readings. So I hope that gives you a better picture of what it looks like.
Yeah, definitely. So basically, it's a bit of a set it and forget it, and then it's just constantly feeding data, or at least every 8 hours continuously for up to 3 years, ideally. And so once a farmer installs it on their field, it just sits there. It's collecting all of this metrics and then feeding it elsewhere that then can be analyzed or reviewed.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the keys here is that because we're measuring both pools of carbon, and actually there was a big paper published in Science 3 weeks ago saying that there were literally trillions of tons of carbon that had been missed out of environmental monitoring because no one's looking at soil inorganic carbon. Everyone's concentrated just on the SOC piece, which we're also measuring, but to miss out SIC, inorganic carbon from environmental modeling, I've seen as insane for the past 10 years. So it's great that it's now been recognized in a really big published peer-reviewed paper.
Yeah, that's pretty encouraging and exciting.
Yeah. And so what we've also done is, because we're obviously licensing the hardware so that, hardware experts can basically take this out, use it and distribute it through the channels that already exist, but by creating their own product or products that can be commercially used and distributed globally quickly, we hope. But Soil Information as a company is very much a data company. And we're collecting all of that data. And what we're doing is bringing context to it. So as well as building these unique sensor chips and developing them with UTD, University of Texas Dallas, we're also working with Texas A&M and Arizona State University to build a global soil carbon model. And we've collected data points with covariance of over 1 million data points already from the US, basically of soil core data since 1950. And what we've done is we've created a historical baseline of data that enables you to see where farmers were down to a 250 meter resolution. So literally getting down to the field resolution, each field. And we've started to make that clickable. So you can basically click on any field in the continental US already. And we've also built an attainable model. So how much carbon could be sequestered in a specific field based on climate, based on soil type, based on, I think, 9 other covariants, that enables you to then plug in the sensor data or lab data as your current level and compare the historical baseline, the current level of both pools of carbon, and what's attainable, which is modeled, and see where a farmer is on their carbon journey, right? Because carbon is non-linear in the soil. It doesn't increase every year. So to incentivize farmers who have already been doing a great job, or have started on their journey a few years ago and have been increasing carbon, you need to keep them close to the attainable level. So every incentive in the space, right, whether it be subsidies, whether it be carbon markets, needs to have a contextualized system. Otherwise, literally soil carbon markets or soil carbon incentives don't work, because carbon will start to peak at certain levels or will start to go up slower after an initial boost if practices change towards carbon farming. And so we need to keep as many farmers as possible close to what's attainable in their region, on their farm, in their field. That's what we've created in the background or are creating, and we're going to be rolling that out globally over the coming months and years to enable there to be some context in the market.
And is that the problem or that you're trying to solve? Because of course, like behind any technology, tech is either trying to solve a problem or it's trying to optimize some sort of procedure that's either outdated or needs to be modernized. So what is exactly like the issue that you're hoping that A, the sensor, and then B, all of the data that's be collecting from the sensor and then used to actually attack? Like, what are you guys trying to address, problem or challenge wise?
Yeah, I think two main things. One is a lack of time series data allowing you to have an average that can be audited. I've come from the auditing world, so the idea that you cannot audit soil carbon or other soil health parameters has always annoyed me. And so the ability to get an average and time series over time, which you can then say, okay, this is a reliable, auditable data set, is the first challenge that we were trying to solve when we set up soil information. We've seen that really clearly in the trials we've done, because we've been taking cores to compare the data against, and we can see huge differences from day to day. For example, one of the horticultural sites that we did a field trial on, they mulched 2 days before we took, without us knowing, because we only went out and collected the soil core. We weren't following exactly what they were up to on the farm. And they mulched 2 days with a huge amount of mulch on the site. And we saw like a massive increase in carbon on the day that we collect the soil core. But obviously, when you're looking at the time series data from the sensor, you see a sudden peak, right? A sudden peak in the data. And if you were doing that just with the soil coring, you wouldn't be able to see what had happened, right? So if you went back 5 years later and someone hadn't mulched just before you took the sample, you'd see a massive drop in carbon, right? So there's no way of auditing that system of using a technician and going out into the field to collect samples. And so that was the big first challenge or thing that we were trying to solve. And then the second challenge actually came about because of a meeting I had in the European Parliament 5 years ago, in which a member of the European Parliament said to me, well, it was great if you're trying to solve the problem of measurement, but how the hell do we use the measurement data? Because we don't have any context to it. It's like, okay, here's some data that shows how much carbon is in this specific field or on this specific farm, but how do we understand how to incentivize farmers to enable them to keep close to what's possible on their farm? And so that's why we wanted to solve that problem. So those are the two main issues that we're trying to solve as a company, and to enable both accurate, auditable on-farm data, which obviously can hopefully be mixed with satellite so it can scale further, and contextual on-farm data at a low resolution so that you can incentivize farmers to doing a great job on their farms from a point of view of carbon sequestration and permanence. And also, by the way, we've also done modeling for water holding capacity, so mixing both carbon and water modeling with the current data. So yeah, those are the two things we aim to solve over the coming years.
Do you envision this replacing core sampling? Because I guess, for people that aren't familiar, what would have to happen is that an individual goes out to a field, they take a sample through a core of the soil, and then they take that back to the lab, and then they run all these different tests to basically measure the metrics that you just listed that the sensor does. That's a time-consuming process. It requires a lot of humans involved, travel, of course. And so is your idea that this would replace that if it's, again, aligned with other techs that you mentioned, or would the sensors work in tandem with core sampling, at least for a while, until it maybe can elevate beyond that?
Yeah, I think you're completely correct in that last point. For a while, I believe that both will work hand in hand, because basically core sampling has been accepted as the gold standard for the last 50 plus years.
Right.
And so when you're coming in with a disruptive technology, it's not going to disappear.
Yeah. You're going to have a lot of people that, of course, question it and they want to test it, especially in the agricultural world, which is like changing away from traditional practices is usually an uphill battle.
100%. And so the idea here is to basically have a system in which the sensors and core sampling are both added into the data platform that we're building. I would imagine, just because I've seen what's happening in the biomedical world, which is where this technology comes from. And by the way, why I have more confidence in this technology, because there's obviously been a lot of know-how built through the ridiculous amounts of money that have been put in the biomedical world, much more than in the ag tech world. And so we're looking at how in the biomedical world things have moved over time, right? From a point of view of how you sample or how you take samples in the human body, and what's useful and what's not. Like taking, for example, even blood or sweat analysis, and how that's moved. And we would imagine that's what will happen in the agricultural world, right? With the use of remote sensing and in-ground sensing. But soil cores will have a place for a long time. It's just like that.
Yeah, no doubt. As you know, my company works in carbon markets, so I, of course, would be remiss if I didn't ask a question specifically tied to carbon markets and carbon projects. So I'm curious, is SIF doing anything at the moment to position the sensors to either be approved by some of the carbon standards, which would allow the tech to be used in their ag and soil carbon methodologies? Have you guys gone down that path so that they can maybe be implemented in carbon credit projects? Because as you and I know, agriculture projects make up a very small percentage of the carbon credit projects globally. And so there's not a lot of credits coming from that. But we also know that there's tremendous upside for these projects to grow. And so standards and registries that have their own methodologies and protocols allow certain techs to be used specifically for soil organic carbon in measuring these metrics. And so have you guys done any work to maybe position it to be accessible eventually to project developers that want to implement a soil carbon credit project from one of the standards?
Yeah, and so 100%. We've been talking to the standard agencies. In fact, we talked to one standard agency last week who suggested that they may mandate the use of SIF.
Wow, that would be tremendous.
Which is insane.
Congrats. I hope that happens.
Yeah, but as you said, right, the big problem has always been that carbon sampling in soil has been very expensive and has not been auditable, which is key. And therefore, in reality, there's hardly been any carbon projects that have linked directly to soil carbon. Such a small percentage. Some of those that have been granted in agriculture, the majority have been linked to practices, not real data. Right, so we aim to change that, and also to give context to the carbon markets. In other words, we're not just saying, okay, this group is increasing carbon from a very low baseline. Please give them money for the first 2 years and forget about them. But to actually say, okay, this is where they are on their carbon journey. Therefore, they should be given money to incentivize them to first increase or keep carbon in the soil close to what the attainable levels are. And so that's what we want to add to the standards that exist at the moment. And we're in that process of working with the standards agencies, some at a very early level, some more advanced. As I said, regarding, using this whole system to enable soil carbon to be actually used in carbon projects at scale. Because obviously, up until now, any technology that requires a technician goes out into the field to take soil cores or to use in-field technology using infrared or gamma or whatever else, or mass spectrometry, it's impossible to be cheap enough to add that kind of technology into a project, unless carbon is going to cost $1,000 a ton from soil carbon next year, which I doubt. The idea is to keep monitoring affordable and implementable on carbon projects.
Yeah, exactly. You just sparked a thought in my mind because, of course, soil carbon projects or ag projects cover a very large area of land, which is how they reach economy of scale. And so can you also kind of explain, like, one sensor would be placed on how many hectares? Does this depend on the soil type or the field type or what crop is specifically being grown? Because maybe it's something that you have to have a sensor every 10 meters, or can you kind of give a sense of what that was? Because of course, these projects cover very large areas of land usually.
Yeah. So in grassland, we're probably looking at one. It's like flat grassland. We're probably looking at one in every 100 acres. In horticulture, maybe one in every 1 acre. Obviously, for the different types of agriculture, it's going to be different. Mainly in crops, maybe one in every 10 to 20 acres. So,
okay, that's pretty reasonable, I would say.
From a hardware perspective, we're looking for them to keep the price really reasonable, and as it can be used or will be able to be used for 2 to 3 years, we hope. We're going to be keeping monitoring and data costs definitely below the holy grail barriers that have never been crossed of, say, $10 a hectare, which starts to enable, obviously that's at low scale. At high scale, you're going to get really low fees, which is going to start exciting the market. Absolutely, because of course, in a project, the MRV is one of the highest costs. It's ongoing, it's continual, it takes up a large part of the budget, but it's essential. Obviously, like without quality MRV, you lose integrity in the project. So that's great. If that's your guys' objective and goal, that's a extremely fair cost for that budget line. You kind of talked a little bit earlier about some projects that you have, but we're going to wrap out soon. But I would just like to hear what projects you have active now and what are the next steps through the rest of 2024 for you guys? Sure. So we'll be looking at Q4, maybe earlier, for specific data work to start being released, and the platform so that people can have a look at it. They can look at it earlier when they contact us, so that we can walk through. In fact, they can already see the platform working. We take people through it every day because there's so much interest. So that can already be seen. From a commercial release, we're looking at later this year on the data side, and the licensee is looking at Q1 next year for some commercial sensors to be available. We've already got Gen 1 prototypes that we've produced for specific projects. We have information and data available already for people to look at. But yeah, we're looking at those timelines from a commercial rollout point of view. And do you have projects in mind, or are you guys going to be looking for project developers that might have a project that they're thinking about and would be willing to use the technology, or how are you guys approaching that? Yeah, I mean, there will be pre-orders coming up. We've just had so much interest, Jay. It's been phenomenal from all over the world. Fantastic. We can't serve everyone straight away, right? So there'll be selection of specific groups that can work initially at smaller scale and then roll out into bigger scale from a hardware perspective. But from a data perspective, we aim for the whole, at least to launch in the US specifically this year. That's exciting. That's very exciting. And then I hope the rest of the world very soon after. Yeah, well, agriculture is a global sector and we need it everywhere. So let's get behind that. Yep. All right, Henry, I always close out the episode in the exact same way, which is tapping into Stoicism, my favorite school of philosophy. And so I'm not sure if you're familiar with Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and all those great philosophers, are you? Well, only to a degree, Jay, so... Okay, well, that's fine. Then that'll make this more interesting. So Epictetus once said, "What concerns me is not the way things are, but the way people think things are." And so because you are a man of agriculture and a man of healthy soil, let's apply it to those two things, ag and healthy soil. What do you think is one thing that must be done
to change the way people think about how ag and healthy soil can drive real environmental impact positively.
Yeah, look, simply, I think agriculture has, of all industries, probably the largest part to play in changing our environment and also our food. Farmers understand that, and especially the new generation of farmers understand that at scale. So I believe that we're going to come up with a system which farmers are going to get excited about getting involved in. I believe that from a carbon point of view and from a planetary point of view, farmers are the key to us having a positive and happy future, to tell you the truth. So that's where we are.
That's where we are. The world's got to eat, and we got to eat better. So I love it. Well, Henry, thank you very much for joining me. It was awesome to hear about SIF and the tech and what you guys are doing. I think it has definitely a lot of potential to continue your pattern of disrupting from your early days as a journalist till now. So I hope that a train keeps moving very, very positively in the right direction.
Thank you, Jay. It's been a pleasure to be on.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. I'm sending a huge thanks to Henry at SIF and the rest of the SIF team, and of course, to all you amazing listeners for tuning in. Be sure to come back next month as I'll be here once again with another climate finance discussion. And before you exit out, please subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you're on Spotify, don't forget to hit the little bell to get notified about new episodes, because we offer more podcast content than just Untangling Climate Finance. You can check out our weekly audio episodes of our newsletter, Sliced, for quick and insightful updates on carbon markets, climate finance, and environmental protection. If you'd like to reach out or have any questions, you can email me at jtipton@gordian.strategies.com. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. You can also find my email address in the show notes. So until next time, ciao. This podcast is produced by Gordian Strategies.